The hot dog shattered her. Ketha clutched it to her chest, mustard streaking her uniform like blood, body shaking, tears flooding her face as she wailed, "Bratwurst!" Sobs ripped from her ribs, hysterical barks echoing in the Louisiana mess hall, women collapsing around her, one dropping to her knees, holding her plate like a lifeline. Hot dogs, juicy, grilled golden, split open on white buns, Rue's special franks, bubbling on the grill. Impossible. After 3 years of sawdust bread choking down gravel, potato peels scraped from garbage in Berlin winters, starving through Stalingrad's frozen screams where brothers froze solid mid-prayer. They'd been told Americans were monsters. Starving beasts. Not this. Not meat on day one. Like it was nothing. Why did a single American hot dog break these unbreakable German POWs? And what happened next? The truck kicked up dust like smoke signals across the Louisiana flatlands, and Corporal Eddie Vasquez felt sweat pool at the small of his back before the women even stepped down. 98 degrees at 0900 hours. The kind of heat that made breathing feel like drowning. 32 shadows emerged from the transport. That's what they looked like at first. Shadows wearing Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms so rotted the fabric hung like spiderweb. Eddie had processed male POWs for 18 months, watched German soldiers step off trains looking hollow-eyed and defeated, but this was different. These women moved like birds with broken wings, each step careful, each face blank except for the eyes that tracked every American movement with mathematical precision. The youngest looked maybe 19. The oldest couldn't have been past 35, but her hair was completely white. "Sweet Jesus," muttered Private Morrison behind him. Eddie didn't respond. He was watching one woman near the front, tall, blonde hair chopped short like she'd done it herself with mess kit scissors. Her uniform jacket had Luftwaffe communications insignia barely visible under the grime. She kept her spine straight despite probably weighing 90 pounds soaking wet. That was Ketha Brenwald, though he wouldn't learn her name for another 6 hours. "Rue's got the mess hall fired up," Morrison said. "Figured they'd be hungry." The women formed a ragged line without being told. No shoving, no talking, just 32 ghosts waiting for whatever came next, and Eddie realized with a sick twist in his gut that they expected violence. Expected to be herded like cattle or worse, because why would enemies who'd spent 3 years bombing each other suddenly play nice? "Welcome to Camp Rustin," Eddie said in his broken German, the words tasting strange. "You will be treated according to Geneva Convention. Food first, medical after." The tall blonde's eyes flickered to him, pale blue, so light they looked almost gray. No one moved. "It's okay." Eddie tried again, then caught himself. What the hell was okay in German? "Es ist gut?" The blonde spoke, voice like gravel. "We understand English." Morrison actually took a step back. The mess hall smelled like grease and hope. Roosevelt Rue Thompson stood behind his grill, a mountain of a man from the 9th Ward who'd somehow ended up cooking for German POWs in the Louisiana swamps instead of fighting in Europe like he'd wanted. The Army had other plans for black men with culinary skills. He'd made his peace with it by deciding that if he couldn't shoot Nazis, he'd at least feed them better than they'd ever fed anybody. The grill hissed. 32 hot dogs rolled across the metal surface, each one splitting perfectly along its seam, juices bubbling up golden and obscene. "Best franks in Louisiana," Rue announced to no one in particular, loading them onto white bread buns, mustard in perfect yellow ribbons. "Y'all probably never had nothing like this." Eddie watched the women file in. They moved in formation even without orders, each one's eyes going immediately to the food, then away, then back again like they couldn't trust what they were seeing. The tall blonde, Ketha, stood at the front of the line, and Rue handed her the first plate with a smile that could have melted Berlin's defenses. "Go on now," Rue said gently. "Ain't nothing wrong with it." Ketha took the plate, stared at the hot dog like it might explode. The mess hall went completely silent except for the overhead fans chopping humid air into smaller pieces of humidity. Eddie counted. 1 second, 2, 3. At 11 seconds, Kata made a sound. Not a word. Not even a scream yet. Just this wounded animal noise that came from somewhere below her ribs, and then she was screaming actual words. Das ist Bratwurst. Bratwurst. She clutched the hot dog to her chest like a dead child, mustard smearing across her uniform, and her face shattered into something between laughing and dying. Tears poured down her cheeks, snot running from her nose, mouth open in this awful wail that made every American in the room freeze because it sounded like grief, like joy, like something they had no vocabulary for. Then another woman started crying, a short redhead with a scar across her temple, then another, then 6 more. Some were laughing, these horrible hysterical barks, while others just sobbed into their hands, and one woman near the back fell to her knees holding her hot dog above her head like an offering. "What the hell did you put in those?" Morrison hissed at Rue. Rue stood there with his spatula, face completely stricken. Just Franks, man. Just regular Franks. Eddie's hand went to his radio. "Command, we have a situation in Mess Hall 3. The prisoners are... I don't know what they're doing. They're crying. All of them. Over the food." Static crackled. "Say again, Corporal?" "They're crying about hot dogs, sir." More static. "Are they injured?" Eddie watched Kata sink to a bench, still clutching that hot dog. Tears. Just streaming down her face while she stared at it like it held the secrets of the universe. Another woman, dark-haired, older, with the calm eyes of someone who'd seen people die, put a hand on Kata's shoulder, but she was crying too. Quieter, the kind of crying people do when they're trying not to. "Negative, sir. I think they're having some kind of breakdown. Medical emergency." Eddie looked at Rue, who looked back helplessly, and then at the 32 women who were weeping and laughing and holding cheap American hot dogs like they were made of gold. Have you ever seen something so unexpected, so completely outside your understanding of the world, that your brain just stopped working? "I don't know what this is, sir," Eddie said quietly into the radio. "But these women haven't eaten real meat in maybe years, and we just served them bratwurst." "We serve them what?" "That's what they keep saying. Bratwurst. They think we're feeding them bratwurst like it's nothing, like it's just Tuesday." The radio went silent for a long moment. Kata finally lifted the hot dog to her mouth, bit down, chewed slowly while tears continued falling, swallowed. Then she pressed both hands over her face and her shoulders shook so hard Eddie thought she might break apart. "Jesus Christ," Morrison whispered. "What did we do to them?" But Eddie was starting to understand it wasn't about what they'd done. It was about what these women had been told, that Americans were monsters, that capture meant death or torture, that the enemy had nothing, was nothing, would give them nothing, and then Rue Thompson had casually grilled them meat. The dark-haired woman who'd touched Kata's shoulder stood up. She walked to Rue with steady steps, hot dog in hand, and spoke in careful English. 3 years, we eat sawdust bread, potato peels from garbage. At Christmas, 1 potato each. She gestured at the hot dog. "You give us this? First day?" Rue's eyes were getting shiny. "Yes, ma'am. Every day if you want." The woman looked at her hot dog, looked at Rue. "Why?" "Because you're hungry," Rue said simply. "And I got food. Don't need to be more complicated than that." She bit her lip, nodded once, then walked back to sit beside Kata, and Eddie watched the two of them eat their hot dogs in silence while tears fell into the mustard and nobody tried to stop crying because, what was the point? 32 women, 32 hot dogs. More tears than Eddie had seen in his entire tour, and nobody was hurt, nobody was dying. They were just eating bratwurst in Louisiana and realizing the enemy was supposed to be human. "Should I make more?" Rue asked quietly. Eddie nodded. "Yeah, make more." And while the grill hissed and popped and the women cried themselves empty, Eddie Vasquez stood against the wall and wondered what the hell kind of war let you break your enemy's heart with a hot dog. He'd find out soon enough that kindness was a parchati, weapon nobody had trained them to use. The morning after the hot dog incident, Liesel Mahler noticed something that would change everything. She was sweeping the barracks, make work assigned by guards who didn't know what to do with 32 enemy women, when she spotted it by the fence. A Lucky Strike cigarette, half-smoked, still burning. She grabbed it before the ember died, took one drag. American tobacco hit different than the ersatz garbage she'd smoked in Hamburg, real leaves, not tree bark and newspaper. The guard who'd tossed it was already 20 yards away, lighting a fresh one. He'd thrown away a treasure like it was nothing. Liesel's brain, the same brain that had tracked Luftwaffe radio frequencies across 3 theaters of war, started calculating immediately. She found 4 more butts that afternoon, 7 the next day. By day 3, she'd mapped every guard's smoking route, knew which ones flicked their cigarettes at half-length versus quarter-length. She recruited Margaret first, 19 years old, baker's daughter from Dresden, scared of everything. "Collect the butts from behind Barrack C," Liesel whispered during dinner. "I'll give you 2 of mine per week." "Why would I want your cigarettes?" Margaretta's hands shook as she held her fork. She did that now, all the time, after the firebombing. Liesel pulled out 3 full Lucky Strikes she'd reconstructed from longer butts, the tobacco carefully repacked. "Because these are worth a month of someone else doing your laundry duty." Margaret stared. In the camps back home, women had killed each other over potato peels. Within 9 days, Liesel was running a shadow economy from inside a hollowed-out Bible she'd found in the chapel. She'd created a pricing chart on stolen paper. 1 Lucky Strike butt equals 2 buttons. 3 butts equals 1 writing pencil. A full reconstructed cigarette equals 1 week of another prisoner's labor. Dorothea Kohl, the Berlin nurse who'd held dying men together with her bare hands at Kursk, became her lieutenant. "You're building a bank," Dorothea said, watching Liesel catalog 43 butts in neat rows inside the Bible's carved-out pages. "I'm building insurance," Liesel corrected, "for when they remember, we're the enemy." She had 340 half-smoked cigarettes hidden by day 16, a fortune in tobacco. She'd just finished her evening inventory when Boots stopped outside the barracks. Corporal Eddie Vasquez stood in the doorway. He'd been watching her for 3 minutes. Liesel's hands froze on the Bible. Every woman in the barracks went silent. Eddie walked forward slowly, hand out. Liesel gave him the Bible without a word. He opened it, saw the rows of cigarettes, the pricing chart in German, the entire economic system she'd built from American trash. She waited for the punishment. Solitary, reduced rations. This was the moment kindness stopped and reality returned. Eddie closed the Bible, handed it back to her. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a carton of Camels, full, unopened, 20 packs of perfect American cigarettes. He set it on her bunk. "You're too smart to be scrounging through ashtrays," he said in broken German, the words clearly rehearsed. He walked out. Liesel stared at the carton for 11 seconds of complete silence. Then she started shaking. Dorothea grabbed her shoulders, thinking she was having a breakdown, but Liesel wasn't crying. She was calculating. "It doesn't make sense," she whispered. "The math doesn't work." For 3 days, she didn't smoke a single cigarette from the carton. She just stared at it, trying to understand the equation. In Hamburg, guards had traded cigarettes for sexual favors, for information, for betrayal. There was always a price, but Eddie hadn't asked for anything. On the 4th night, Liesel took the carton to the latrine at 2 a.m. She opened it with shaking hands, pulled out 1 Camel, lit it. The tobacco was so fresh, it made her dizzy. That's when she started crying. Dorothea found her there, sitting on the concrete floor, smoke curling up toward the single bulb. "Liesel?" "We were told they were animals," Liesel said. Her voice sounded hollow. "Monsters who would rape us, starve us, work us to death like they said we did to the—" She stopped. Couldn't finish that sentence. I know what we were told, Dorothea said quietly. My entire system. Liesel gestured at nothing, at everything. 340 cigarettes. I built it on the assumption that they would be like us, that they would withhold, threaten, leverage, that kindness was a transaction. She took another drag. He gave me 20 packs. Dorothea, 20, for nothing. Maybe not nothing, Dorothea said carefully. Maybe he saw a smart woman doing what she needed to survive and decided to give her a way out. Liesel laughed, but it came out broken. That's worse, don't you see? If he's doing it because I'm smart, because I'm a person. She stubbed out the cigarette violently. Then what did we do? If they can see us as people this easily, what does that make us for not seeing? Stop, Dorothea cut her off. We can't go there, not yet. But Liesel's black market collapsed overnight anyway. She tried to maintain it for appearance, but her heart wasn't in the math anymore. She gave away cigarettes for nothing, stopped tracking debts. By the end of the week 3, she'd distributed the entire carton to women who needed it more, Margaret with her shaking hands, Anna with her nightmares, Kata who hadn't spoken since the Bratwurst incident. Eddie noticed. Of course he noticed. He started leaving things for her. A newspaper from El Paso, 3 weeks old. A broken pencil that still had half its lead. Once, inexplicably, a stick of Wrigley's spearmint gum that made her teeth hurt with sweetness. The night he brought her the first newspaper, Liesel read it cover to cover by moonlight through the barracks. Window. She found the section listings. Colored jobs and white jobs in neat columns, like it was normal to divide human beings by skin shade. The next evening, during the 15-minute exercise period in the yard, she cornered Eddie by the fence. Your newspaper, she said in careful English. It has 2 job sections. Eddie's face did something complicated. Yeah. Why? If America is free? He looked at the guard tower, the other guards, anywhere but at her. It's complicated. No. Liesel's voice was flat. It is simple. You divide people into categories and tell some they are worth less. This is not complicated. We did this. You are doing this. Eddie's jaw tightened. That's different. How? We're not. He stopped. We don't have camps for them. Liesel tilted her head. You had camps for Japanese Americans. I read about this. Manzanar. Topaz. If this is about freedom, why did your own citizens go to camps? Eddie had no answer. His hands gripped the chain-link fence until his knuckles went white. I am not saying this to hurt you, Liesel said, softer now. I'm saying this because you gave me 20 packs of cigarettes for no reason, and I'm trying to understand what kind of a country does that while also, she gestured at the newspaper, while also this. A fucked up one, Eddie finally said. The English was too fast for her to catch, but his tone translated perfectly. They stood there on opposite sides of the fence as the sun set over Louisiana swampland, 2 people drowning in contradictions they couldn't resolve. I need to tell you something, Liesel said. Her English was breaking down, so she switched to German, speaking slowly so he could catch fragments. Kristallnacht, 1938. I was 14. Hamburg. Eddie knew that word. Every American soldier knew that word by now. I watched the synagogue burn. My father made us walk past the broken glass to school the next morning. He said, her voice cracked, he said, so, you remember what silence costs. She looked down at her hands. 1944. They came for him. He hid a Jewish mail carrier in our basement for 6 days. Someone informed. I was 18. I stayed silent when they took him because I was afraid. Eddie's throat worked. Liesel. I stayed silent, she repeated. And he died in Sachsenhausen for 6 days of kindness while I was operating radios for the Luftwaffe, pretending I didn't know what we were doing. She met his eyes. So when you give me cigarettes, when you see me as smart, as human, it breaks something. Because if you can do this so easily, then I have no excuse for... France, Eddie interrupted. Last year, we captured a German soldier. He was already surrendering, hands up, unarmed, and 3 guys from my unit beat him unconscious anyway. Liesel went still. I watched it happen, Eddie continued. His voice was flat, dead, and I said nothing, because I was terrified of being labeled a Nazi sympathizer, the Mexican kid, defending a German. So I let them kick him until he stopped moving, and then I helped carry him to the POW truck like nothing happened. Did he live? I don't know. Eddie's hands were shaking now. I never asked, because asking would mean admitting I cared, and caring would mean he couldn't finish. They stood there, both of them vibrating with shame and recognition, 2 people who'd chosen survival over courage and couldn't forgive themselves for it. Liesel reached through the chain-link fence, took his hand. It lasted 4 seconds, maybe 5. Then they both panicked and separated, looking around to see if anyone had noticed. But the yard was... The baseball diamond shimmered in the Louisiana heat. Week 5, and Ketha Brenwald had perfected invisibility. Spine straight, face blank, eyes fixed on nothing. The camp commander wanted Red Cross inspectors to see civilized America. So 32 skeletal German women sat in splintered bleachers while teenage boys played a game Kata didn't understand. Guards versus Ruston High School. The scoreboard meant nothing to her. She'd decided weeks ago that feeling nothing was survival. Dorothea Cole sat beside her, arms crossed. The surgical nurse had steady hands, even now. "They're very serious about this," Dorothea whispered, watching a guard argue with an umpire. Keta didn't respond. Responding meant caring. The crowd numbered maybe 200. Guards, their families, townspeople who'd driven out to see the spectacle. American music crackled from a radio someone had propped on a fence post. Glenn Miller. She recognized it from the mess hall now. Everything here had a soundtrack. In the 3rd inning, a scrawny shortstop dove for a ground ball. The kid couldn't have been more than 16, all elbows and desperation. He caught it an inch from the dirt, scrambled to his feet, fired to first base. The crowd exploded. Ketha's eyes tracked to the stands. A one-armed man in a farmer's overalls stood up, tears streaming down his weathered face. His remaining hand clutched his chest. "That's my boy!" he screamed in Cajun-thick English. "That's my Tommy!" The boy, Tommy, waved from the field, grinning like he'd conquered Europe. The father sat down hard, still crying, but he was smiling, weeping and smiling over a catch. Ketha's chest tightened. She tried looking away, tried the blank face trick that had worked for 3 years, but her eyes kept returning to that one-armed father, who was now laughing with the woman beside him, wiping his face with a handkerchief. Klaus had been 17 at Stalingrad, younger than this shortstop. The thought cracked something she'd sealed shut. Klaus never caught anything except frostbite and a bullet, never dove for anything except cover that didn't exist. Their father received a letter with 3 lines and a medal that arrived bent. No body, no grave, just died with honor for the fatherland, and a crooked piece of tin. Had their father cried? She couldn't remember. Everything after that letter was gray. But this American father was crying over a game, over his son being alive and catching a ball. Ketha stood up. She didn't plan it. Her body just moved. "Warum?" The word ripped out of her throat in German, loud enough that the entire crowd turned. "Why do you get to cry about baseball?" Dorothea grabbed her arm. "Ketha, sit. Mein Bruder war 16." Keta's voice cracked. She was pointing at Tommy Broussard now, jabbing her finger at this boy who got to play shortstop instead of dying in a frozen trench. "He was 16. He froze holding a rifle he didn't want. He never got to—" She couldn't finish. The words tangled with sobs she'd been swallowing for 2 years. Klaus playing catch in their Stuttgart courtyard before the war. Klaus laughing, Klaus alive. "He died in the snow, and you get to watch your son play games." Ketha's legs buckled. Dorothea caught her, but the nurse was crying too. Stop, Ketha, please. "My fiancé died at Kursk. Dorothea's voice was barely audible. "He was a music teacher. He taught piano to children, and they gave him a rifle, and he died in a field, and these people—" Her words dissolved. They clung to each other in the bleachers while 200 Americans sat frozen in their seats. The baseball game had stopped. Tommy Broussard stood at shortstop, glove dangling, staring at the two German women falling apart in public. Ketta couldn't stop. Every suppressed grief from 3 years poured out in German that nobody here understood, except it didn't matter because everyone understood crying. She screamed about Klaus's last letter, about how he'd written that he was cold, that he missed her apple cake, that he wanted to come home. 3 sentences that arrived 4 months after he died. She screamed about her mother's silence, about the empty chair at Christmas 1943, about the fact that she was alive and eating hot dogs in Louisiana while Klaus rotted in Russian dirt. Dorothea was still holding her, but Dorothea was shaking too, her surgical steadiness finally breaking against the image of fathers crying over baseball instead of body bags. The one-armed father stood up. He walked down from the stands slowly, his boots creaking on wood. The entire field watched him approach the chain-link fence that separated the bleachers from the POW section. He stopped 3 feet from Ketta. She looked up, tears blurring her vision, expecting anger. Expecting to be told that her brother deserved to die, that all Germans deserved to freeze and rot. The man pulled a handkerchief from his pocket with his remaining hand. White cotton, worn soft. He held it through the fence, said nothing, just extended it toward her and nodded once. Ketta stared at this man who'd lost an arm, probably in their war, fighting her people, offering her something clean to wipe her face. She took it with shaking fingers. The man's eyes were wet. He touched 2 fingers to his chest, then pointed at Ketta, then at the sky, a gesture that needed no translation. "I understand. I'm sorry. They're gone." He walked back to his seat without another word. Tommy Broussard pulled off his baseball cap at shortstop, held it over his heart. The game didn't resume for 11 minutes. Ketta sat in the barracks that night, the handkerchief folded in her lap. It smelled like tobacco and soap. She'd washed her face with it 3 times and couldn't bring herself to return it. Dorothea sat on the next bunk, staring at her hands. The hands that had amputated legs and stitched chest wounds and held dying soldiers while they called for their mothers. "I don't know how to hate them," Dorothea whispered. Ketta pressed the handkerchief to her face. Neither did she, and that was more terrifying than anything else in this war. Eddie started bringing newspapers after the handkerchief incident. Not official ones. Discarded sports sections from Shreveport. 2-week-old copies of the El Paso Herald-Post his cousin mailed him. He'd leave them folded on the mess hall table nearest the fence during his evening rounds. Never said a word about it. Liesel collected every single one. By week 8, she was reading them during yard time, her finger tracing headlines while Margaret braided Anna's hair beside her. The other women had stopped asking what the articles said. Liesel's English was getting too good, too fast, and it made some of them nervous. Dorothea watched from the barrack steps, arms folded, deciding whether this was a survival instinct or something more dangerous. Then Eddie showed up on a Tuesday night with a Dr. Pepper. Liesel was sitting against the fence, alone, working through a classified section. She looked up when his boots stopped at the chain link. He held the bottle through one of the diamond-shaped gaps without speaking. She stared at it for 7 seconds. "What is this?" Her English was careful, each word selected like ammunition. "Soda. Like Coca-Cola, but different." Eddie shook it slightly. "Texas thing." Liesel took it. The glass was cold, impossibly cold in this swamp heat. She'd forgotten what refrigeration felt like. The first sip hit her tongue and she jerked backward, eyes watering. The carbonation burned. She coughed twice, then sneezed so hard the bottle nearly slipped from her hands. And she laughed. Not the bitter sounds that sometimes escaped during cigarette distributions. Not the hollow noise women made when Rue's gumbo was too spicy. This was something uncontrolled, something that came from a place she'd buried in 1943 when the Gestapo took her father. Eddie was grinning like he'd just won a hand of poker. "It makes you sneeze," Liesel said, still laughing, wiping her eyes. What is wrong with Americans? Your drinks attack people." "Builds character." Eddie crouched down to her level through the fence. "My abuela says it cures everything from heartbreak to hangovers." Liesel took another sip, more prepared this time. The sweetness was almost painful. "Does it cure anything?" "Absolutely not, but it tastes good." She drank half the bottle in silence while he pretended to check the perimeter. When she finished, she held it up to the floodlight, examining the label like it was a historical document. "In Hamburg, we had beer gardens," she said quietly. "Before, my father would take us on Sundays after church. There was this place near the Elbe with metal tables that got hot in the sun. They served apple cake and let children have half glasses of Radler, beer mixed with lemonade." She set the bottle down. "Klaus always stole the cherries from my cake. Every time. I would complain and my father would make him give them back, but Klaus knew I didn't actually like them. I just wanted to win." Eddie sat down properly now, back against his side of the fence, mirroring her position. "You talk about him like he's still stealing cherries. He is 19 now. Would be." Liesel's voice didn't crack. "The telegram came in January 1943, Stalingrad. They didn't send a body, just paper with stamps." A mosquito landed on her arm. She watched it instead of swatting it away. "I joined the Luftwaffe Communications Corps 3 weeks later," she continued. "My mother begged me not to. She said we'd already given enough, but I needed to believe Klaus died for something. That if I worked the radios, if I helped coordinate the defenses, then his death meant something." The mosquito bit her. She crushed it with her thumb, leaving a smear of her own blood. "I was very good at my job," Liesel said. "I have, what is the English? Photographic memory for numbers, call signs, frequencies, coordinates. I could track 30 aircraft conversations simultaneously and never miss a transmission. My superior officers said I was invaluable." Eddie pulled out his canteen, took a drink. "That's why they didn't kill you when the camp was overrun. You were too useful to waste." "Yes." Liesel looked at him directly now. "The British soldiers who captured us, they were surprised we were women. One of them, very young, maybe 18, he couldn't stop staring. Not in a bad way, just confused. Like we were magic tricks he couldn't figure out." She picked at the label on the empty Dr. Pepper bottle. "He gave me chocolate. A Cadbury bar, split it in half. I tried to refuse, but he insisted. Said his sister was my age, and he couldn't stand watching women starve." Her fingers stilled. Then his commanding officer saw him and screamed at him for fraternizing. Called him a Nazi lover. The boy, he looked at me like I'd betrayed him somehow, like I'd tricked him into feeling sorry for the wrong person. Eddie closed his eyes. "Last November, outside Metz. We took a farmhouse that had been a German supply depot." Liesel went very quiet. "There was this one guy," Eddie continued, "Wehrmacht, probably 40 years old, hands up, no weapon, surrendering in broken English, and Private Morrison, kid from Tennessee, just started beating him. Rifle butt to the ribs, over and over. The German wasn't even protecting himself anymore, just curled up on the ground." His hand gripped the canteen so hard the metal dented. "I watched it happen. Stood there for maybe 90 seconds while Morrison kicked a man who was already done. And I didn't say anything because I was the Mexican kid from El Paso who joined up after Pearl Harbor to prove I wasn't a coward or a spy or whatever else people whispered. If I defended a German, I'd be the traitor. So I watched a man get beaten unconscious and I said nothing." A guard tower spotlight swept across the yard, illuminating them for 3 seconds before moving on. "Morrison broke 2 of the guy's ribs," Eddie said. "Fractured his jaw. They hauled him off to the POW processing station and I never found out if he lived. Do you want to know?" Liesel's voice was barely audible. "No." Eddie looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "That's the worst part. I don't want to know because then I'd have to carry it differently." Liesel reached through the fence, just extended her hand into the gap between them, palm up, fingers steady. Eddie stared at her scarred knuckles and the calluses from years of radio equipment and the dirt under her nails that no amount of rationed soap could fully clean. He took her hand. 4 seconds. That's how long they stayed like that. Long enough for Liesel's pulse to hammer in her wrist, for Eddie's thumb to accidentally brush across her palm, for both of them to realize this was the first intentional gentle touch either had experienced in years. Then footsteps echoed from the guard station and they separated like they'd been electrocuted. Eddie stood up fast, adjusting his rifle strap. Liesel pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller. The footsteps passed. Just another guard doing rounds. But Eddie didn't leave. "Tomorrow night," he said quietly, still facing away from the fence. "Same time. I'll bring you something else." "What else is there?" Liesel asked. "You'll see." He walked away before she could respond, his boots crunching on gravel, and Liesel sat there holding an empty Dr. Pepper bottle like it was a sacred object, her right hand still warm from where his fingers had been. Inside the barracks, Dorothea was waiting by Liesel's bunk. "You're playing with fire," she said flatly. Liesel set the bottle on her footlocker. "Maybe I'm cold." "He's the enemy." "Is he?" Liesel met her eyes. "Because he keeps doing a terrible job of acting like it." Margaret rolled over in her bunk, pretending to sleep. But her breathing was wrong, too controlled. Half the women in the barracks were probably awake, listening to this exact conversation, making their own calculations about loyalty and survival and the strange American corporal who kept giving their cipher expert gifts. Dorothea sat down heavily on the bunk across from Liesel's. "I had a fiancé. Did I tell you? Heinrich. Piano teacher from Charlottenburg. We were supposed to marry in June 1942, but the Wehrmacht conscripted him in May, sent him east." She pulled out a photograph from inside her pillowcase, a young man with gentle eyes and musician's hands standing beside a piano. "He wrote me every week for a year. Then the letters stopped. I got the notice 3 months later. Kursk. Somewhere in that nightmare my Heinrich who taught children Beethoven died in the mud." Dorothea's voice was surgical room steady. "And now, I watch Americans cry over baseball while my fiancé is buried in a mass grave nobody will ever mark. So, when you ask me if that corporal is the enemy, I don't know how to answer anymore." She tucked the photo back inside the pillowcase. "But I know this," Dorothea continued. "Whatever you're building with him through that fence, it can't survive the real world. We're going home eventually. He stays here. Geography doesn't care about Dr. Pepper." Liesel lay down on her bunk, staring at the ceiling beams. "What if I don't want to go home?" The barracks went dead silent. "Hamburg is rubble," Liesel whispered. "My mother's last letter, the one the Red Cross delivered. She's living in a basement with 6 other families. No windows, no heat. They eat British ration bread and American charity flour. Klaus is dead. My father is dead. What exactly am I going home to?" Margaret stopped pretending to sleep. Anna sat up in her bunk. Ketta, still awake from her own nightmares, walked over and sat on the floor beside Liesel's bee. The mess hall smelled like coffee and bacon grease. Ketta Brenwald stood at the German women's table, metal cup in one hand, spoon in the other. She banged them together. Once, twice, 3 times. 200 people stopped eating. Forks froze halfway to mouths. American guards turned. Red Cross officials in pressed uniforms looked up from their clipboards. Even the kitchen went quiet. Rue Thompson's spatula suspended over the griddle. Ketta's hands shook. She'd rehearsed this in broken English with Dorothea for 3 nights, whispering in the barracks after lights out. But standing here, with everyone staring, the words scattered like birds. She forced them out anyway. "We are told..." Her accent mangled the vowels. "You are devils. Fat devils who eat steaks while world is starving." A nervous laugh rippled through the American side. Someone coughed. Ketta's voice cracked. "We come here to die or suffer because this is what we deserve. But you give us hot dogs." More laughter now, confused, uncertain. The Americans didn't know about that first day, how Ketta had clutched that Frankfurter like it was her brother's last letter, how the sight of casual meat had shattered every lie she'd swallowed about American savagery. "You give cigarettes," Ketta continued. Her knuckles went white around the cup. "You give medicine for Margaret's infection." She pointed. The 19-year-old girl dropped her head, tears already streaming. Without American penicillin, the sepsis would have killed her in 4 days. Everyone in the barracks knew it. "When you could watch her die," Ketta said, "you cry at baseball." Tommy Broussard's father straightened in his seat near the back. His one remaining hand rested on the table. "You share newspapers. Roosevelt." Ketta's voice broke completely. She pointed at Rue Thompson, who stood frozen by the grill, spatula dripping grease onto his apron. "Gives me recipe for gumbo to take to my mother." Rue's face crumpled. He turned away, shoulders shaking. The mess hall held its breath. "I do not know what to do with this." Ketta's words came out barely above a whisper now. "I am taught to hate, but you make it impossible." She sat down hard. The metal chair screeched against concrete. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Then Rue Thompson moved. He set down the spatula with deliberate care, wiped his hands on his apron, and walked back into the kitchen. The swing door hissed shut behind him. 30 seconds passed. A minute. The door opened again. Rue emerged carrying a massive tray. Steam rose from it in ghostly columns. He crossed the mess hall floor in absolute quiet, 200 pairs of eyes tracking him, and set the tray down on the German women's table. Fresh beignets, dozens of them, still hot, dusted with powdered sugar that caught the overhead lights like snow. "Made these at 4 this morning," Rue said quietly. His voice cracked. "Figured y'all should taste New Orleans before you go." Anna, the youngest at 17, reached out with trembling fingers, touched one, pulled back like it might burn her. "Go on," Rue said. "They're real." Anna lifted the beignet, bit into it. Powdered sugar exploded across her chin and she started crying so hard she couldn't swallow. Then Liesel Mahler stood up. Every eye shifted to her. The woman who'd built an empire from cigarette butts, who'd learned English in 6 weeks through sheer will, who'd held Eddie Vasquez's hand through chain-link fence and felt her entire understanding of enemies dissolve. "Some of us don't want to go back," Liesel said. The words hung in the air like smoke. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Hendricks, 42, from Iowa, who'd buried his son after Normandy, closed his eyes. His jaw worked. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I can't let you stay," he said. Each word cost him something. "Regulations, repatriation orders, it's not my call." Liesel nodded. She'd expected this. "But I can write letters," Hendricks continued. His voice strengthened. "Good letters. To church groups, sponsors, people who might help down the line once the paperwork clears, if you want." Dorothea Cole stood next. Then Ketta, then Margaret, still clutching. The beignet Anna had given her. One by one, the German women rose until all 32 were standing. Across the mess hall, American guards got to their feet. Not as a show of force, as witnesses. Rue Thompson pressed both hands over his mouth, shoulders heaving. Eddie Vasquez stood in the back corner, cap in his hands. His eyes found Liesel's across the room. She looked back. Neither of them smiled, but something passed between them that had nothing to do with barbed wire or enemy nations or the 3,000 miles that would separate them in 72 hours. It lasted 3 seconds. Then Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks cleared his throat. "Dismissed. Finish your breakfast." The spell broke. People sat. Forks scraped plates. Conversation resumed in hushed tones. But the beignets stayed untouched for another minute. The women stared at them like they might vanish. Like kindness, this concrete couldn't possibly be real. Anna finally took another bite. Then Margaret. Then all of them, powdered sugar coating their fingers and faces, eating slowly, trying to memorize the taste. December 27th, 1945. The transport trucks idled outside Camp Ruston's main gate, engines coughing diesel smoke into the freezing Louisiana morning. 32 degrees. The locals wore winter coats and complained bitterly. The German women stood in formation wearing donated sweaters over their cleaned uniforms. Eddie Vasquez handed Liesel a wrapped package through the fence, brown paper tied with kitchen twine. "Don't open it until you're on the ship," he said. Liesel held it against her chest. "You shouldn't." "I already did." Her fingers tightened on the paper. "I wrote the address down, El Paso, your father's garage." "I know. I don't know if I can come back, if they'll let me, if—" "I'll wait," Eddie said. 2 words. Absolute. A guard called for boarding. The women began moving toward the trucks. Ketta Brenwald stopped in front of Rue Thompson. She pulled something from her pocket, a folded piece of paper already worn from handling. The gumbo recipe he'd written out in careful block letters. "I show my mother," Ketta said in halting English, "if she is alive, if Stuttgart still stands. I cook this. I think of you." Rue pulled her into a hug right there. Regulations be damned. She buried her face in his shoulder and shook silently. When they separated, Rue pressed something into her hand. A small cloth bag that smelled like spices, filet powder, cayenne, thyme. "You'll need the real thing," he said. "Can't make proper gumbo without it." The trucks loaded. Engines revved. 32 women who'd arrived as hollow-eyed enemies sat in the cargo beds wearing American sweaters, carrying American recipes, holding American kindness in their hands like grenades that had failed to explode. The convoy pulled away. Liesel twisted in her seat, watching Eddie's silhouette shrink against the fence until the trucks turned onto the main road and he disappeared. She unwrapped the package. Inside, a full carton of Lucky Strikes, a Spanish-English dictionary, a Dr. Pepper bottle cap, and a letter that started with "Querida Liesel" in Eddie's careful handwriting. She read it 3 times before the transport reached the rail depot. By the 3rd reading, she'd stopped crying enough to smile. January 14th, 1947. Shreveport, Louisiana. Liesel Mahler stepped off the Greyhound bus carrying one cardboard suitcase and wearing a donated blue dress that hung loose on her still thin frame. 14 months of paperwork. Church sponsorship. Letters from Lieutenant Colonel Hendricks that used words like exceptional character and valuable contributor. She'd made it back. The bus depot smelled like cigarettes and diesel. She stood on the curb, scanning faces, heart hammering against her ribs. Then she saw him. Eddie Vasquez leaned against a Ford pickup, his father's, judging by the faded paint, holding a glass bottle that caught the afternoon sun. Dr. Pepper. Condensation ran down the sides. He'd lost weight, too. His uniform was gone, replaced by jeans and a work shirt with oil stains on the sleeves. His hair was longer. But his eyes, those same dark eyes that had watched her through chain-link fence that had confessed cowardice and promised waiting, those hadn't changed. Liesel set down her suitcase. Eddie pushed off the truck. They stood 6 feet apart. After 14 months of letters, after crossing an ocean, after surviving everything that should have made this impossible, they hesitated. Then Eddie held out the Dr. Pepper. "Still cold," he said. Liesel laughed. The sound punched out of her, harsh and bright. She crossed the distance, took the bottle, drank without breaking eye contact. The carbonation made her sneeze. Eddie reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box, opened it. The ring was simple. Silver band, no stone. Everything his discharge bonus could afford. "I'm not good at speeches," Eddie said. "But I meant it. The waiting part." Liesel set down the Dr. Pepper, took the box. Her hands shook so badly the ring rattled. "My mother wrote," she said. "From British Zone. She said—" Her voice cracked. She swallowed, tried again. "She said my father would approve."